Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, General James Hill. General James Hill retired from the U.S. Army after 36 years of active service to the nation. A highly decorated combat infantryman and soldier diplomat, he served in Vietnam and Desert Shield, Desert Storm. As a general officer, he served as the deputy commander, 25th Infantry Division Peacekeeping Force in Haiti, and the Deputy UN Commander Peacekeeping Force in Haiti. His last assignment was Combatant Commander, United States Southern Command, commanding all U.S. military forces in Central and South America and the Caribbean. Upon retirement, General Hill continued his government service to the nation. He was appointed by the President to the 2005 Base Realignment and Closure Commission, where he was serving until April 2006. General Hill is the president of GT Hill Group, a consulting group focused on strategic leadership and national security issues. His clients have included Smith & Wesson, Microsoft, Northrop Grumman, the Protective Group, and Fraunhofer USA. He occupies several board positions, both with for-profit and non-profit organizations. His pro bono work includes case majeure, dedicated to improving the economic well-being of at-risk women in Latin America. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome with me General James Hill. His topic will be Eisenhower's farewell address and today's military.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with you and to accept the invitation from Mark to attend. On the evening of 17 January 1961, President Eisenhower delivered his message of farewell and leave-taking, his words, to the American people. Some 70 million reportedly tuned in. It was short, only about 16 minutes long, but it wasn't musing nostalgia, although it could easily have been that way, for a man who had been a public servant of the United States for over 50 years since he entered West Point in 1911. Rather, from his very first direction months earlier to his lead speechwriter, he wanted, again in his words, to have something to say when I leave here. President Eisenhower is too often overlooked and underappreciated for his historic presidency. There are too many photos of him in a wheelchair recovering from a heart attack or once recovered holding a golf club. In our bad mind's eye, we look with wistfulness on the peaceful prosperity of the 50s, forgetting the real threat of nuclear annihilation, the nation's palpable fear of communism punctuated by McCarthyism. We forget nearly going to war over 2 rock islands in the Pacific, Quemoy and Matsu, or the emergence of Fidel Castro and communism just off our coast, to mention just a few of the national security issues he faced. And almost as an aside, there was a domestic political debate over spending almost as fierce as the one ongoing today. Through it all, President Eisenhower steered the ship of state through the storm, seeking a conservative balance, both fiscally and internationally, decried all the way along by the right wing of his own party. He was not conservative enough. He was even called moderate. If you ever wonder when moderate became a dirty word, you could go back to Eisenhower's time. And he was decried by the big spending left, who chastised him, among other things, for being asleep at the switch and allowing a missile gap to grow between the United States and the Soviet Union, something they knew to be false. But like the myth of the missile gap, the truth of the I like Ike easygoing presidency is belied by the reality of all that he accomplished. Recently, I've been doing a lot of reading about Ike, and I commend 2 of the very best to you, yet easier reads. Ike by Michael Korda, the English historian, which focuses on Eisenhower the soldier, and most importantly for this discussion, Eisenhower the White House years by Jim Newton, to whom I'm indebted. I'm indebted for he helping me crystallize some thoughts I've had in bits and pieces for many years about the role of the military, our military, in today's complex environment, But I'm not here to give you a history lesson about Eisenhower the soldier or Eisenhower the president. No, what I'd really like us to think about and to ponder this morning is the notion of what he, Eisenhower, would think about the state of the United States military and its role in security formulation, especially in light of his farewell address. From the outset, let me state I'm not here to deliver a major message of dramatic defense reform. I am not naive about the way Washington works, nor do I view the system as corrupt or bankrupt, hopefully in some allegorical sense. I do not view the brass in that derisive tone that the brass somehow connotes. I mean, I am one. I do not see the defense industry as evil masters of war, as Bob Dylan would have you believe it. Government is not the problem. The military-industrial complex is integral to our nation's security and well-being. It is reality and not going away. But if you look at Ike's warning in context of today's news, you have to admit we've gotten ourselves into a pretty pickle when we cannot discuss defense downsizing and reform without the specter of hundreds of thousands of possible job losses. So with those disclaimers, let's spend the next few minutes discussing a few nagging concerns and cautions I have about our military in today's political environment. As with many things in Washington and in our history, people use events and spin words to support and press their specific interests or agendas. Imagine that, someone spinning purported facts to support their agenda and point of view here in Washington. Just imagine that. So it has been with President Eisenhower's farewell address. Through the years, much has been said, written, editorialized about the most memorable part of the 17th January address, and that is his discussion of the then just evolving concept of the military-industrial complex. Again, his definition, his words. The concept, however, was not really new to him. He had, in fact, spoken about the cost of maintaining a permanent war footing, something very new to the American thought process, a permanent war footing as early as 1953. In a much earlier farewell address, President Washington had even discussed and warned about the necessity of overgrown military establishments and entangling foreign engagements. But 1961 was different from Washington's time, and the leadership role of the United States in world affairs vastly dissimilar. Eisenhower knew that. He was not naive in that regard. Nuclear Armageddon and the Soviet Union were real threats requiring constant military vigilance. It's been 50 years since that address. Most of us, if we knew, most of us have already forgotten exactly what was said, in what context, and with what intent. This is what he said. He said we had been compelled to create an arms industry of vast proportions, that he recognized the imperative need for the development, but that we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications because its influence, economic, political, even spiritual, could be felt throughout the country and society. And he warned the councils of government to guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the industrial military complex, and the potential for disastrous rise of misplaced power. All his words. It was, he would later write, the most challenging message I could have left the people of this country. During the drafting and editing, he even toyed with calling it the industrial military congressional complex, a descriptor I find more accurate then and today. He offered no fixes to the problem. As he saw it, he offered no legislative agenda or government reform ideas. It was simply a warning to an alert and knowledgeable citizenry to take care so to ensure security and liberty can prosper together. So here we are 51 years later, in a world that President Eisenhower would have trouble recognizing. Certainly we have evolved into a military-industrial congressional complex far greater than the one he would have imagined. That is not to say, however, that reality is all bad. Indeed, as we have aged over the last half century, we've really done pretty well. In many respects, because of the industrial, military, congressional complex. You can make the argument, for example, that we won the Cold War because of the military-industrial complex, congressional complex, but that we lost the related peace dividend for the same reason. But there are cautions from the past and cautions for tomorrow that should make us pause as alert and knowledgeable citizenry in a world where concerns abound. Sequestration, or at best, huge defense shortfalls and a divisive budget war on the Hill and inside the Pentagon, Iran's bomb, Pakistan, a Europe with a truly minimized, marginalized military, NATO being a shell of its former self, a turn to the Pacific for our security focus, a changing Russia that is beginning to resemble the USSR minus the united part, to mention but a few. And we will have to work through these problems in an era of radical partisanship. Without question, since the early days of the draft all-volunteer military of the mid-'70s, we have built the finest military the world has ever seen. Of that, I have no doubt. It is the best trained, best led, best equipped, best motivated force we have ever fielded. Oh, and not as a by-the-way tagline, it is also the most expensive. It is the best because of the military-industrial congressional complex. Of that, I also have no doubt. The combat arm of our military is mostly active duty, and because of that, it can be used quickly and on presidential authority without a large call-up of reserves, though they are required for any deployment over 60 days or so. The reserve forces, after 10 years of fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, are battle-hardened and as a result require less mobilization and train up to get ready for combat. All of that is both good and bad. The good part's obvious. The bad is that we can have a rush to judgment, a hasty call to arms, when arms may not be the best response. To put a bumper sticker on it, just because we can does not always mean we should. From my earliest days as a general officer, as a one-star worker bee in the Pentagon on the Joint Staff, involved directly in national security policy formulation, I have seen this phenomena at work. Example, in the early debate over the former Yugoslavia in the Clinton administration, with Madeleine Albright saying, "Why do we have this large force if not to use it?" I was lectured by the senior staffer on the National Security Council, making an argument for military involvement, for being overly concerned with, in her words, putting my precious soldiers in harm's way. But most telling was a moment in the White House Situation Room during a meeting of the interagency deputies discussing our possible involvement in Somalia in the waning days of President George Herbert Walker Bush's administration. After a lengthy discourse by the senior State Department attendee over the need for U.S. intervention, the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, "If you're asking, can the United States military stop the dying in Somalia, then the answer to that question is yes. Yes, we can. We can stop the dying." From that moment, there was very little serious discussion about if we were going to go, but when and how. I took away from that this belief: the military must never offer simple solutions to complex problems to politicians and policymakers, because they will jump at the opportunity, often with little regard to the second and third order effects. Put another way, In a conversation with then Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General John Shalikashvili, who's now dead, regarding our impending action in Haiti during the first year of the Clinton administration, he asked me what I thought it would take to defeat Haitian security forces. My flip answer was, I could take down Haiti tomorrow afternoon with the Army band. His very serious response to me was, if you really believe that, don't ever say it again. Someone will let you try. In my future dealings as a four-star, I recall those conversations often. In no way do I relate those anecdotes to demean the motives of good people grappling with hard decisions. But I do feel that our military superiority is a factor, conscious or subconscious, that often moves the use of force or coercion to the top of the option list too quickly. It is that same superiority factor, coupled with cost, time, political objectives, and crisis, that ultimately decides size, force size, and composition. I saw this during the Balkans debate, where U.S. force size went from 125,000 down to 25,000, an arbitrary force ceiling set in haste, supported by no military rationale, but which once said was absolute. The build-up to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were beset in many ways, in my opinion, by this notion of superiority. We used hope as a tactic, hoping and believing a small force and technology could accomplish everything. Then pictures of special forces on horseback in Afghanistan led us to believe and to think that a similar operation was possible in Iraq. Where once major combat operations were concluded, we were left with a mess of incredible proportions. All of that could and should have been anticipated, but cautionary voices like that of Chief of Staff of the Army Rick Shinseki went unheeded and indeed were met with derision. I think this is what President Eisenhower had in mind when he talked about the ramifications of misplaced power. A coordinated civilian military Department of Defense, Joint Chiefs of Staff, combatant commander, winning the policy debate with dissenting voices shoved aside. The best thing to happen to the defense establishment since the National Security Act of 1947 was the Goldwater-Nichols Defense Reorganization Act of 1986. By that visionary congressional action over the robust objections of the uniformed service chiefs, the services were forced to plan and execute joint operations. It strengthened the role of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the combatant commanders, those responsible for the conduct of military operations in their respective geographic areas. Joint doctrine, joint training, joint operations, and their combined combat effectiveness are the cornerstones of our warfighting superiority today. By tying service on a joint staff to promotion to general or flag rank, Goldwater-Nichols ensured the service's very best and brightest officers would populate the joint staff in the Pentagon. As a result, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff can hold sway over national security policy debates because of the size, intelligence, dedication, and strength of the joint staff, churning out policy papers, well thought out options, and almost irrefutable military logic. The chairman has evolved into a position of enormous political power that would amaze President Eisenhower. I would not have it any other way. Indeed, the country has been well served by all of the chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff with whom I've had personal involvement, starting in 1984 with General John Vesey. But as we have seen in recent years, especially since General Powell was chairman, the marriage of a strong SecDef and equally adept chairman can be a formidable force in national security policy making. The role of the chairman is that of the senior military advisor to the president. The role of the joint staff to assist the chairman in that capacity, to provide the military voice to the national command authority. The chairman lacks command authority. That is, the ability to issue orders in his name to the combatant commanders. That authority derives from the president through the SecDef. Goldwater-Nichols got this piece exactly right, in my opinion. They increased the power of the chairman by giving him legal authority, indeed responsibility, to speak his mind irrespective of the political views of the SecDef. It kept him in check by ensuring civilian control through the SecDef. No one in uniform would have that any other way. But there is a fine line trod by all chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff between military advice and political advocacy. The U.S. military must somehow stay above the fray, always be seen as an execution arm of civilian-derived policy, not the driver of policy. And I believe that was Eisenhower's warning about the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power. It is, in my opinion, one of the things that truly separates the United States military and its relationship with the American people from all other militaries in the world. Goldwater-Nichols also increased dramatically the role of the combatant commander. As I traveled throughout Latin America as the Commander, United States Southern Command, I was struck by the reality that of all the people in our government, the one individual most knowledgeable about a region, who traveled extensively throughout the region, who saw firsthand the interaction of ideas and issues between countries in the region, who talked to political leaders, military leaders, governmental leaders, dissidents, union leaders, people on the street, was a military guy. Except for the U.S. ambassador of the United States, the face most seen on a regular basis in country X is a military face. There's something wrong there. Part of the reason of this imbalance is logistics. Part of it, the reason, is the size of the State Department. The logistics part is I had a plane. State Department people didn't have that kind of access. I tried to overcome it by inviting senior state representatives to travel with me, and I worked at helping our ambassadors get past their natural in-country myopia by bringing together at my headquarters on my nickel U.S. ambassadors from the region to discuss their issues, their country issues, with each other and with my staff. And I used my excellent State Department appointed foreign policy advisor as my confidant and as my subject matter expert. The role of the combatant commander is essential to our national security policy, especially in building effective mill-to-mill, military-to-military relations with allies. But it must not be overstated, and he must not be allowed to wander off undirected. Ike would be, I think, like me, conflicted by the role of our military in world affairs today. I'm gratified because of their prowess and professionalism. As a soldier, I applaud their warfighting skills, their ability to adapt, their dedication, devotion, and commitment to country, their resilience, and that of their families in the face of multiple deployments. As one who helped build the U.S. modern military, I'm more than gratified. I'm incredibly proud. And I'm also gratified that we have built this incredibly effective tool when used for good to help United States policy. I'm also dismayed. We have been at this too long in Afghanistan. It is not winnable, whatever that is, by force, and it is not sustainable for much longer. If we had fought Iraq and Afghanistan as General Eisenhower fought his European campaign with only uniformed people and not contractor support, it is unimaginable we would still be at it. The American people would have insisted long ago to be done with it. We would have found a better way. And if the policy-making errors that we made to get us there in the first place aren't modified or corrected, we are doomed to repeat them in the future. Finally, a few random thoughts to finish on this morning about possible ways to modify or improve upon the reality of the national security making within the context of the military-industrial congressional complex. I recognize that any of these thoughts are very difficult to enact. A few of them are in the policy apparatus world, a few in the budget world, because the budget world drives the policy world. The truth is we have the military we can afford, not the one we necessarily require. We need greater understanding and appreciation for each other, diplomat and warrior, ambassador and general, at our highest levels. There is a position on the Joint Staff, the assistant chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's a 3-star position. And he's tasked to be the senior military advisor to the Secretary of State. He usually travels with him and her and has continually since Goldwater Nichols, except when General Powell, who became Secretary of State, said, I do not need a military advisor. Correctly. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff also has a foreign policy advisor, and they used to be called, I think they really still are called, political advisors. POLAD is the term. And that guy with the chairman should always be of equal rank or stature as the 3-star that we send over to Sec State. In the same vein, combatant commanders deal on a daily basis with senior and political leaders of their countries in their regions. They have POLADs assigned from the State Department in their headquarters. They're a mixed bag. I saw their advice and understanding, especially of the State Department culture and mindset, which is very different from the United States military, essential as I developed relations and policies in Latin America. Mine was great, but I wish he had had some more ambassador time. And the POLAD position in the State Department is not viewed as a career-enhancing position. If the State Department made the POLAD position more attractive to senior, experienced foreign service people, maybe of ambassadorial rank, maybe the best and brightest of them would want to be POLADs, and we'd all be well served by that. It is very difficult to kill a really big ticket defense program or system, either in the Pentagon or on the Hill. There are simply too many agendas at stake, not to mention dollars, and dollars are jobs, and jobs are votes. What if there was an independent arbitration commission to take the political risk out of the process? I can hear the naysayers now from both sides, but it's clear they really need help in this area. In the same vein, Congress needs to assist to help the Pentagon rid itself of unnecessary facilities. It's one thing to cut the Pentagon's budget, and then it's another thing to tie their hands and say, but you can't close down this, you can't move that, you can't do this. The Base Realignment and Closing Commission, of which I was a member of, the last one in 2005, has proven to be a very effective political cover tool for the Congress. Is there a need today for some sort of BRAC every 5 years, or even less? I think so. It doesn't need to be the size and scope of the previous BRACs. Maybe you put a ceiling cap on how much you can take down. But you need something, and you need, in my mind, you need some kind of standing commission staff, and maybe even some standing commissioners. The military was slow to understand cultural and religious issues in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're doing much better in that regard, and we got to continue our training in this to stress the important aspect of military operations. This is absolutely critical because when combat operations ends, it is the troops on the ground who must begin to repair the damage. And I'm not talking structural damage, I'm talking societal damage. One way to do that might be to grow U.S. Army Civil Affairs units in the active force. President Eisenhower's caution to an alert and knowledgeable citizenry was prescient, every bit as relevant today as it was 51 years ago. Indeed, even more so in this age of globalization, driven by technology, conflicted with ever-increasing tensions of competing cultural values and ideologies. This new reality begs our nation's leaders to give every consideration to interagency, interdisciplinary options to national security problem solving so as to prevent an easy default to the use of force directly or coercion, or as coercion. The threats we face today are every bit as real and dangerous as in Eisenhower's time, but far more complex and varied. And there are no easy solutions to that, which leads us to today and this meeting. It is gatherings like this and other thoughtful exchanges that help inform and educate an alert and knowledgeable citizenry so that, in Eisenhower's words, security and liberty can prosper together. I like Ike. And with that, I'll take your questions.
Okay, General, thank you very, very much. I see you've inspired a number of questions. Maybe we'll start in the back and then make our way to the front. Okay?
Well, people here have had a steady diet of flag officers over the past few days. One thing is certain, General, you speak like a general.
Well, thank you. I hope that means thank you to that anyway.
Well, we share a couple of things in common. One thing is that we're both Vietnam veterans. The second thing is that we probably know some of the same people. I served directly under Bernie Rogers and General Smith, DeWitt C. Smith, who was who headed up the War College, 2 stints. I just wanted to establish that. But I want to get back to March 18th, 1968, when this was a date that the My Lai massacre occurred. And there was a Captain Hugh Thompson who was flying a helicopter over that area, flying an observation helicopter on a mission. And he looked down and he saw American soldiers shooting unarmed civilians. He landed his helicopter right between the fleeing Vietnamese and the soldiers and directed his door gunner to shoot the next soldier who would kill a civilian. What's interesting is 30 years later, the Army gave 2 of the surviving members, Hugh Thompson and one of the, I think it was the crew chief, an award, the Soldier's Award, which is a very prestigious
Soldier's
award.
Medal.
The Soldier's Medal. Mm-hmm. And I just want to read what Mike Ackerman, General Ackerman, said about that event. Excuse me for 1 second, because I think it's important. He says here, and I quote, "It was the ability to do the right thing, even at the risk of their own personal safety, that guided these soldiers to do what they did. The 3 set the standard for all soldiers to follow. The question begs to be asked, do those standards still exist?" I think it's important to point out that in the Pentagon today, there's a divergence of opinion about military operations. Well, that's nothing new. We know that. But does that standard still exist? The standard that Mike Ackerman was talking about, does that standard exist, and what does it mean? The other thing is I'm a Vietnam veteran, as I said, and I'm a member of the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, the same Vietnam Veterans Against the War that Senator John Kerry was a member of. And it's important for this audience to understand that, well, when I went in the Army in 1966, there was already the rumbling of discontent and discord on the question of the war. I asked somebody the other day, what are the 2 questions that soldiers ask the most, especially in a war zone? And it was amazing. I was talking to guys from different armies, and, well, they came up with basically the same question. When are we going to eat, and what are we doing here? So I want to know from you, General, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but with that standard, with that high standard, which I actually kind of like, well, the Army does teach people not to obey unlawful orders. We're taught that. But, the reality is you take certain things into consideration when you do decide you're going to refuse to obey an unlawful order. There's certain things that go along with that, especially if you're under arms. In the case of Hugh Thompson, it meant that they had to bear their arms against their own soldiers to make the point. I think you get my point. So where's our standard today, and how can things like Abu Ghraib happen, torture of prisoners, and so on?
The short answer to your question is, yes, it is just the same as it was then, or better, in my opinion. How does Abu Ghraib happen? How did My Lai happen? How do any of these atrocities happen? Because they are in fact done by individuals. You'd have to go back and look at My Lai, which was an incredible tragedy, and then the lead up to it and how all that happened. But the reality of life was we did, in fact, American soldiers massacre women and children. Abu Ghraib was a horrifying event. It took place in a very small part of the prison. It took place by soldiers not supervised. It took place, and it should never have taken place, but it did. There are atrocities that have happened in every war we've ever fought, and there will be atrocities happening in every war we ever will fight, because individuals are involved in them. The question, though, is, do you, in fact, have disciplined soldiers who would respond that way? I'll give you an anecdotal answer. I work with a company that makes the protective armor that soldiers wear. And during the height of the Operation Iraqi Freedom, there was a tape of a Iraqi insurgent sniper team, and they are filming this event. And they are looking at a soldier standing by his Humvee, and they're about to shoot him. And they're talking to each other, and all of a sudden they say, Allah Akbar, and they fire the round, and it hits this kid right here, and it knocks him to the ground like somebody hit him with a baseball bat. He leaps up because the round has not gone through his vest and has not killed him. It stunned him, and it hurt. And he immediately begins returning fire. Another group of people come and they shoot and wound the Iraqi sniper team. What happens next is pretty remarkable. The kid who had just been shot is a medic, and he comes over, administers first aid to the people on the ground, and saves the two men who had just tried to kill him. I submit to you, there are very few armies in the world that train their soldiers that way to react that way. Do things happen? You betcha. Do we take action when we find out about it? I think the answer to that is yes. And we are all well served by that as Americans. Who else?
Thank you very much. I think there's a hand here.
Thank you for service in Vietnam, by the way.
Thank you, General. Excellent speech. I agree with just about everything you said, particularly your point that the American military is the largest U.S. diplomatic presence abroad. I'd like you to go into a little more detail, if you can, about how the military can improve cultural relations with Iraq.
With Iraq?
Yes. You were saying programs earlier, you thought, in your final points?
Well, we have hardly anybody left in Iraq to do that. We do, in fact, have some training teams there. We do need to, I'll go back to the earlier comments in here about strengthening the opinion of the United States abroad. You have to do that. We are working diligently inside the military, especially in the Army, that I'm mostly familiar with, to train our people to understand that about cultural diplomacy, cultural diversity, and to deal with it. It's not always easy. I have a son, a first lieutenant, who just returned from a year in Afghanistan. And as I listen to him talk, I hear conflicting things. I hear him understanding what is going on and his interface with it. I hear also the kid who had to fight, who had to be in harm's way and all of that, and you get some pretty different emotions when you are in fact getting shot at. It's pretty difficult to love this guy that you in point of fact are getting shot at. I'll take myself back to Vietnam though. And it goes back to this gentleman's issue about how soldiers and how you deal with them. If you allow your unit to dehumanize its enemy, anything can and will happen. You must, in fact, ensure that your soldiers understand that this isn't about lethal targets, any of the euphemisms you want to hear about direct action and lethal force. This is about me killing someone or being killed. If I put people in that situation and I don't train them to understand that there is some still basic humanity involved in this, then bad things can and will happen. The Army works at that very hard, very hard. I never looked down at a dead North Vietnamese and not see one of my own soldiers, not see myself sometimes in my mind. And I had to continue to look at him as a human being. And that's hard to do sometimes, but we work hard at it. So you get at your question? Okay. Sir, ma'am.
Sherry Mueller, adjunct professor at American University. Thank you very much for a very provocative, helpful talk. Two questions. Could you comment on the effectiveness? I think we underestimate the impact of military exchange programs.
Yeah.
And if you could say a little bit
Yeah.
about them. And then how do we back off from this incredible outsourcing that has probably gone too far?
Yeah, those are two great questions. Let me get at the military to military relationship and exchange programs. One is they're at the junior level, they build an understanding between us and people we're dealing with. That's important. At the senior level, you can, in fact, if you've built military to military relationship on a good basis, then you can enable your country's policy to go forward. I'll give you an example. In the lead up to Mr. Aristide in Haiti requesting us to help him leave Haiti, and that's the reality of life, not anything else you've read. On a Saturday morning, I'm at my office, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff called me and said, we're looking at options to try to get a United Nations force in, a U.S. force, a combined multi-country force into Haiti when Mr. Aristide leaves to help the situation stabilize it, and then a follow-on UN force. Would you begin calling around and see what you can do? I made a call to the chief of the Chilean army, a guy I'd been around for many times in my in and out visits. And I said, we need some help. It's an important hemispheric issue. Will Chile help? Yes, we will. I'll call the Secretary of Defense or the Minister of Defense, who happened to be Madame Bachelet, Minister Bachelet, who wanted to be the president of Chile. She called me within 30 minutes and said, we will send a company. I said, Minister, how about a battalion? She laughed, said, they'll be there in 24 hours. They were when we called them. I called the Brazilian head of the military and said, hey, listen, you guys talk a big game about playing on the world stage. How about playing? Would you come and be part of a UN force, and would you lead it? They're still there today. When I went to Brazil, 5 months later, just as the first Brazilians were going in ahead of the UN team, he said to me, the only reason that there are Brazilians going to Haiti today is because you asked me and I trust you. That's positive. That's the real great role of what combatant commanders do around the world on a daily basis, because they can get at those issues that nobody else can. Does that get at it? Get your answer a little bit? And what was the second part was walking back the contractors. I don't know how you do that. boy, now you're into a really big problem. You know, I make the point about if we had fought Afghanistan like Eisenhower did, with uniformed guys flying the airplanes, uniformed guys driving the boats, uniformed guys doing the cooking, uniformed guys doing everything, would have required millions of people, because all of that cost is pushed off to the side, because in point of fact we do commercial airliners to fly most of that stuff around, because we do have contractor support doing a lot of other things. So a lot of that, the cost is there, but the cost in lives is hidden. You would need a military far larger than the one we have. I don't think we could afford it. I don't think the American public would want it, and it would probably require some return to something akin to a draft, which is anathema to me as a soldier and as a citizen. We don't need a draft. We don't want a draft. You are so much better off served by an active force, by an all-volunteer force. So we're going to have to reach some accommodation in that. If you read Jim Newton's book, Eisenhower, the White House years, he makes a pretty strong case about Blackwater and Halliburton and this and that. Too much. Because his point is, did they drive the policy? For example, Cheney was, Vice President Cheney was president of Halliburton. So when he's elected, he says in the book, so now they had a guy inside the thing. I disagree with that. That's putting motives against people I don't like. I mean, I don't believe in. But it is going to be difficult. I don't know how we do that. What you got to do is avoid getting there in the first place. Avoid the use of the force. Avoid using those military guys. And you do that through different ways of getting at it. John Bolton didn't get into Syria. I didn't like the Libyan engagement, but that sort of worked. Going into Syria militarily would be insane to me, accomplish nothing, and in the long run be very detrimental to our policies and to the world. So, got to be careful in all that. It's hard issues. Yes, sir.
Before I give him the microphone, I'd like to give also a special welcome to the president of the ICD Young Leaders Forum, Mr. Yasser Yakash, the former foreign minister of Turkey. If we could please give a brief welcome to Mr. Yakash. Thank you.
Thank you, General, for the excellent presentation. I would like to ask you a question. In light of the experience that you referred to of the military presence of the United States in Afghanistan and in Iraq, if you were today the military advisor to Hillary Clinton, and if she was to ask you, what should we do for Syria, what would be your answer?
I think the only thing we can do for Syria is to continue to work with our allies, Turkey being one of them. I don't think it's very useful if Turkey does something militarily on the borders, for example. Nor do I think that they will. I think cooler heads will certainly prevail there. But I think we have to continue doing diplomatic, economic, and I think we have to find, in the final analysis, being a little crass, we better find Assad a home. Because what he's got right now, he's got no place to go. Even if he wanted to walk out tomorrow afternoon, what does he do? So there is no reason for him to give it up. And the best we can do is to continue to say to him, we're not going to help you. In my opinion, we could have been a little bit stronger when we talked to Mubarak. We kind of let him string out a little bit when we didn't say stronger words, in my opinion, about we're not going to we did eventually say, we're not going to help you. But that could have all happened, I think, a little bit easier, too. That's how I see it.
Is there a final question, maybe? Or come over here. Okay. Ladies first.
Hello, General. My name is Alessandra Cambiaso. I have a question. What are your thoughts on the occurrences where military and government officials have acted in a disrespectful or dishonorable manner in the inhabited foreign country, especially concerning the accounts of military personnel urinating on the Quran and non-military government officials soliciting the services of prostitutes in countries such as Colombia, Venezuela, and other Latin American and non-Latin American countries? Thank you.
You mean the Secret Service guys in Colombia?
Right.
All right, well, that ain't military guys, although they might have been there too. Let me go back to the whole Quran issue. We teach people a whole lot better and had to be smarter than that, than the urinating on the Quran. I mean, you want to walk up to people and say, what planet do you exist on that you don't understand that there are ramifications of doing something stupid like urinating on the Quran? What planet what human being hasn't seen some of that take place? And I hear people say, well, they shouldn't get so upset about it. Okay, fine. They shouldn't get so upset about it. They do. And because they do, you better figure out some way not to do that. The only way you can do that is training. It's awful. Those guys will get the punishment they deserve for what they did. And we don't back off of that very often. We don't back off of that very often. So that's where I get into that. And the whole thing with the Colombian prostitute issue is, stupid. I will never understand the male psyche. Period.
Okay, the final question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Oh, and the other part of that is, I am never anymore surprised by anything. I am, however, still amazed by a lot of stuff. Yes, sir.
Good morning, General. Your presentation here reflects, Chris Ibe is my name, from Nigeria. Your presentation here reflects the totality of a general. And I must say thank you for this inspiring presentation and responses. From your presentation, I kind of conclude, or let me not say, I kind of understand that most of your actions in service was actually based in the Southern America, because you've really talked about Southern America, Northern America so much, because I see you commanded the southern part of the Southern Command. And I'm seeing the level of expertise and you people display around in handling issues diplomatically and in combat area. I'm trying to compare or ask you your experience about the African soldier, the African military. Because from the level of diplomacy, understanding cultural and otherwise that you're trying to present here is kind of far from it when you come to the African system. I want to ask you, what experience do you have of an African military? Thank you.
The basic answer to that is very limited, as have most U.S. military people, or in many ways most Americans. However, the United States 2 years ago, maybe longer, 4 years ago, the U.S. military decided that we needed the same approach in sub-Saharan Africa as we had in South America. The way the U.S. military looks at the world as we divide the world regionally between combatant commanders. That's who does the military work inside a region. Pacific Command in the Pacific, European Command, Southern Command in Latin America, Central Command, which is Southwest Asia, and there's 5 of them, and I just lost it. Forget it. Doesn't make any difference. There's another one. Yeah. But we decided that Africa had been run by European Command for a long time. And as a result, if I'm the European commander, where are my bigger issues? My bigger issues are in Europe. And so Africa got short shrift. We have now got a combatant commander, U.S. Africa Command. I think that's a step in the right direction. Interestingly enough, the deputy commander of U.S. Africa Command is a State Department guy. Another step in the right direction, in my opinion. because that's what most of those dealings are going to be with. I've been in Africa on several occasions. I've been to Kenya, I've been to Zimbabwe, South Africa, Botswana, Sudan. Did I say Kenya? Kenya. Never been in Nigeria or East Africa, West Africa. And I have never had any dealings except with a small contingent of African, and I've even forgotten which country it is, because it was a very small number of them, in Haiti when I was with the United Nations force in Haiti. To show you another example about how the United States and the United Nations do and don't deal with each other, I am one of only 3 that I know of U.S. general officers to ever wear a blue beret working for the United Nations. 2 of them were in Haiti at the same time that I was there. There's been mixed bags of in terms of the African forces that have gone in peacekeeping actions inside Africa. Mixed reviews, but I can't really answer the question any more than that. I wish I could, but I can't.
Okay, well, on that note, I would ask everyone to please join me in expressing our sincere gratitude for General James Hill. Thank you very much.
Thank you.